Right, so yesterday it was another speech by Keir Starmer, folks. They really should bring them out with a warning label, likely to cause drowsiness, or if listening to Tories makes you irrationally lash out, do not tune in, that kind of thing. This was a speech that acknowledged the damage the Tories had done economically, that identified the problems economically, but offered no new solutions economically, just a return to old ones. Believe we can starve the economy of investment in order to make it grow. This was less of a speech from the heir to Blair. This speech may as well have been written by 2010 David Cameron and George Osborne, because it's their plan being rehashed that didn't work, that messed up everything, and as if to underline the fact he won't spend if he can avoid it, told a story about his own sister that makes him sound like the most tight-fisted miser going, that at this time of year made him sound like a modern-day Ebenezer Scrooge. There's no three ghosts coming to visit him to offer us any salvation should he reach power, though. But we can think twice about where our votes are going if he's set on making this country even worse through continued rampant economic illiteracy. Right, so Labour's economic vision for the country. Starmer was giving another speech, so prop open your eyeballs with those cocktail sticks again, folks, because it's going to be another dry one. The man with all the charisma and appeal of a plasterboard offcut. No, I'm not being mean. It's not an insult if it's an accurate description. So he turned up at the Resolution Foundation. That's a think tank that was set up according to its stated aim in order to improve the standard of living of low and middle class incomes. How nice of them. A great pity they hosted a man therefore making a speech where none of that was his intention whatsoever. Well, he started out by pointing out the failings of the Tories. Always a good place to start if you're an opposition leader, I suppose, although his politics are no different. And he did that by referring to a graph produced by his own hosts showing their findings following the autumn statement, which showed this Parliament is on track to be the first in modern history to show living standards have fallen. To be honest, you imagine they haven't looked very hard, or haven't looked hard enough at their statistics then, because lives have been hell on earth for most people since 2010, especially those on the lowest incomes, certainly. I suppose it's only now middle incomes are getting squeezed too that it is showing up in this particular think tank's findings. The point being, we're all worse off. Yes, very good, Keith. We've known that for a long time. You've just identified the problem. Great. What are you going to do about it then? Well, we had to wait for a bit because Starmer decided he had to take us back in time. Go back to the 1970s and his own upbringing, because when doesn't he ever shoehorn it in? As an example of knowing what a cost of living crisis feels like. Well, I grew up in the 1980s, sunshine, and if you didn't notice the struggle of people growing up through Thatcher, and you would have been a little bit older by this point, you'd be a little bit more clued in, a little bit more aware. If you weren't so badly off as it turns out, were you, in that Pebble Dash semi you speak of so often? But he did actually go on to make some very accurate points on how it feels to try and work more to make ends meet. That feeling of running into a brick wall, the stress of struggling, the choices you have to make when you go shopping. And we know that is because work doesn't pay, despite what the Tories keep telling us, and wages have fallen behind the times. But he didn't make that assertion. He didn't make that ongoing connection. That's me stating the obvious on what that feels like to me, and what I imagine it does to most people of a working class background in this day and age. It does seem obvious to me. Didn't seem to occur to him to go that far, though. But he did go on to say now is worse than anything we've dealt with before, and in that I do believe he is quite right. And he also quite rightly identified the excuses being made by the Tories regarding this in relation to the pandemic and the war in Ukraine, for why they say that is, but isn't. But ultimately, these things are always governed by political choices. So come on, Keith, what are your choices? What choices are you going to make things different then? What are you going to do to change lives? Well, first he decided to identify productivity as being low. Newsflash, genius, we don't manufacture a great deal. Our manufacturing base was shot by Thatcher, the same woman you praised the other day. Big investment in getting that going again, is there? We're going to have lots of money going into manufacturing to rebuild our manufacturing base. Well, don't be silly. Just because he identifies problems doesn't mean he offers solutions. He's not a leader, and that requires courage and leadership, and he doesn't have either of those things. If this speech had a theme, it was that. Lack of courage and leadership, but here I can see what's going wrong. Here's everything wrong with the country. I won't be fixing them, though. Vote for me! That was the message here. It was rather a novelty when he identified the mantra, if you work hard and get on, as a lie, because, let's face it, he'd know he lies like a rug. It tickled me further when he said all the excuse making would end if Labour take power, because he's never taken responsibility for anything ever going wrong in his party, not even once. Raising productivity growth will apparently be Labour's #1 goal, though. So how are you going to do it, Keith? What areas of productivity are you going to look at? Well, we've become a service-based economy thanks to Thatcher. How are you going to increase productivity when fewer people can afford services? Nothing on that per se. It will be his obsession, though, we're told. Obsession, that's a new buzzword he's coming out with. Then he equated productivity, that other buzzword has come up a lot in this speech, to wealth creation. And this should set alarm bells off. Because where is all the wealth that has been or is being created? We aren't seeing it, are we? Not us. Inequality in this country isn't as a result of the country not being necessarily productive, I would say. It is just that all the money that gets made goes to those at the top. The rich get richer as our incomes stagnate or drop and our lives get worse. Starmer is saying productivity will be his obsession, not wealth creation, therefore, will be his obsession. But who's going to get the wealth this time? Look at the man's donors. Look at his appeals to Tory voters. Look at his praise for Thatcher. Come on, folks. We know where this is going to go. We've heard this song before. He believes it is this thinking, this red Tory thinking, basically, that is actually uniting his party and what people are buying into. I don't believe people are buying into more Tory mantra. I can well believe it's united his party, though, because barely any Labour MP these days is worthy of the name. But then, of course, the platitudes followed, didn't they? All this productivity, this wealth creation, this growth must benefit ordinary working people, he says. Well, you've identified the problems again, you sharp son of a gun, you. But that remains to be seen, along with where all this productivity and wealth creation and growth is coming from, because without any investment, he's magicking it all up out of the ether. The Tories have sung songs of growth and failed to deliver time after time after time because they never spend to invest. They just blow up spending and inflation with idiotic tax cuts and losing money down the drain over foolish spending ideas such as we saw during the pandemic. Well, he's finally getting to that bit. A new consensus, a new economic model, he says. Wowzers, is he going to come up with something new and radical and exciting and transformative then? Oh no, he said securonomics instead. The buzzword from his favourite economist, the awful Rachel Reeves. She who went to George Osborne for advice on being a chancellor. Now it all becomes clear, doesn't it? Starmer, we know, is economically clueless. He's utterly reliant on Reeves on this score, and she's as big a red Tory as you're ever likely to find on the Labour benches. Did I mention austerity earlier? Yeah, it makes sense now, doesn't it? Not for us, obviously, but as for Team Keith, at any rate. Increasing productivity by starving the economy of the necessary investment. What the Tories called austerity. But Labour's buzzword for this is rules-based growth, of course. Rachel Reeves and her fiscal rules. The absolute nonsense she literally just made up, by which all Labour spending will be measured against. You'll hear those rules come up again and again and again in the future of that, I'm certain, but without explaining what they are, I expect. No context given. Not that there is much to explain anyway. There are only two rules, in fact, and they are that day-to-day spending will be paid for via general taxation, and number two is to get the debt down. For one, taxation doesn't pay for anything. It functions as an offset for government spending. We don't ever have to wait for tax collections in order to pay for anything, do we? Makes it seem obvious saying it that way, doesn't it? And getting the national debt down when it is just an umbrella term for all the money in financial use and the literal currency rattling around in our pockets and wallets and isn't really a debt at all shows just what nonsense these rules are. What these rules are is an excuse to say you want to do all of this productivity, all of this growth, have all this obsession, but you can't afford to spend to get there. Therefore, just as the Tories have failed, so will Starmer's Labour. You cannot get growth without investment. Economic growth itself is finite anyway. Measuring it differently, say in terms of public well-being, would be a better measure, I think. Is the economy not supposed to work for all of us, after all? Because it seems we're all just batteries in a machine called the economy, which never delivers a return, and we're all, frankly, running out of charge. Duracell bunnies we are not. Nonetheless, Starmer is quite happy to blame the Tories for what a future Labour government can do, or can't, as the case may be. Depends how you like to look at it. It's the note excuse. Remember the note? The note excuse saying there's no money left except flipped in reverse and without the note this time. If you hadn't twigged to that, Starmer was stupid enough to mention the note himself in his speech, but only in the context of showing how growth is the only way out of the Tory mess we're in, despite still not saying how he'd deliver it without investment. It'll be a hard road to walk, no doubt about it, he said. Not that he'll be walking it because he's a millionaire. Anyone expecting Labour to turn on the spending taps is going to be disappointed, he added. But without that, you can't achieve growth. Where's this growth going to come from without investment? Only by forcing people to work longer hours or to increase their productivity. Are you planning on turning the UK into a sweatshop then? It's the only logical conclusion from what he said. Austerity will stay because we won't spend, not to invest, not to fix public services. The government wallet is getting slammed shut after more than a decade of underinvestment by the Tories, to be continued by him and Reeves. He blames inflation for this, debt for this, taxation for this. He's an economic idiot, therefore. More taxation, especially from those who can pay it and haven't been made to for so long, frees up governmental ability to spend. The debt, as I've already explained, isn't really a debt. This isn't a household budget. It's a government that can print its own money. And inflation, as we already have, has been halved by the Tories, and they've made enough noise about it in the process because finally Sunak achieved one of his stupid pledges. But Starmer can't use that as an ongoing excuse either. It is his choice to starve the country of investment should he reach power. Nothing will change, as I've said in many a video before. He reckons it is doable because he ran the CPS during the years of austerity, but actually you left a year into the Tory government, so you didn't run it for long. In fact, when it looked like your budget was being cut, anyone might think you at that point decided to up sticks and run. But he reckons reforms and changes can help free up finances. His reforms at the time at the CPS were widely panned by those he worked with, so possibly not a good place to point to, and not a good sign for the future if he gets to run the entire country. He acknowledged there were people all over this country waking up every day knowing every penny counts. And he had an example to use, his own sister, as alluded to in this video title. You might have been wondering whether I was ever going to get to that point. But I was always coming to it, because you see, this is very hit peak stupid. He gave an example, saying, let's go to the pub for lunch to his sister. And she was so hard up, you see, that she'd show up with a packed lunch. He said that her immediate response to being asked to go to the pub was that she would make sandwiches. If Starmer is choosing to compare how he would run the country to that example, I would say, since you're a millionaire, why won't you buy your hard-up sister a fucking meal when you go out then? I come from a fairly close-knit family. I'm the eldest of 4. We look out for each other. We help each other out. If I was a millionaire, I know my siblings wouldn't struggle in their daily lives whilst I lived in luxury. I wouldn't like it. I wouldn't be comfortable with that. Yes, Starmer's sister takes a packed lunch to the pub when going out with him. Scrooge isn't quite the word, is it? He'd run the country like that. The man who thinks that controlling the nation's finances in that way, he's not just an idiot, he's a miser with it. The response from this dreary, depressing speech ultimately had some commentators comparing him more to Cameron than Blair, and with Reeves being a de facto George Osborne in waiting, the comparison fits very well. A Momentum spokesman said of this, "These are deeply worrying remarks from Keir Starmer. Instead of laying out a popular alternative based on public ownership and public investment, the Labour leader is adopting the Tories' failed economic approach. Starmer's stance isn't just out of touch with Labour members and voters, but with the public too." That's the polite way of putting it, I'd say. Tory austerity will remain as Starmer and Reeves' path to growth and productivity, despite it all having failed multiple times before. Nobody is voting to get the Tories out when you're voting to just put the red Tories in. No one's voting for Tories out if all you're going to get is a change of faces and a change in the haircuts, and nothing in the policy is actually ever going to change at all. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. As per usual, more content out daily. Please do have your say in the comments below and be part of the conversation on this. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where back in July, Keir Starmer announced he was going to keep the Tories' cruel poverty-inflicting two-child benefit cap, helping to reinforce that Sir Kid Starver shtick he'd earned if he went into government, inviting comparisons with austerity even then. So I guess it's just every other Labour policy now catching up to that at this point then. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.